We talk about the 4% rule a lot in retirement planning. But let's be honest, it's more of a rough guess than a golden rule. And now its original creator is revising it upwards to 4.7%. So, does that mean your retirement paycheck just got a raise? Or is this just another headline that oversimplifies a complex decision?
It's easy to get lost on the way to retirement. Things like taxes, improper planning, and excessive market risk can all lead you astray from your goal of a successful and happy retirement. That's where Liz Whittaberry comes in. She's a holistic financial advisor and the founder of Best Path Advisors, and she can help guide you to a better financial path. This is Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for tuning in this week to Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry and myself. And Liz and I are going to talk about the 4% rule getting a makeover. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see what Liz thinks about that. So Liz, how you doing this week?
I am good. I'm enjoying the spring.
Yeah.
We've got flowers starting to bloom.
Well, we've had a ton of rain, so yeah, everything's blooming like crazy around here. So that's always good. But let's talk about this. You mentioned in the tease that the original creator, who I think created this rule back in the 90s. I'll let you kind of expand on that for us. But wants to kind of bump it up, which is funny because the last number of years talking with advisors over the last decade, seemed like the 4% rule was talked about more like the 3.2% rule or something like that, more of a reduction. So
Right.
Curious to hear about this change, this makeover. So break it down for us a little bit.
And you're right. There's been a lot of talk about should we reduce the 4% because rates are lower and inflation is higher and people are living longer. So there's been a lot of talk around that, a lot of research that's gone into it. And we even talked sometime back, I forget which episode, about some of the ranges of safe withdrawal rates. So that's an interesting thing. But this particular rule dates all the way back to 1994 when William Bingen published an article. Now, he had been working on it for years. He was a financial planner. He's got a background, a very good background from MIT, very smart gentleman. And he wanted to figure out what was a minimum, withdrawal rate. What could you take safely? And if there was a financial catastrophe, you could be assured that you would still have money at the end of a 30-year retirement.
Right.
Yeah. And that's this 4%. It was actually 4.15% in his study. So that it was lowered to 4% just to round it off and make it easy. Right. This 4% rate was the number that never ran out of money in any situation. And he, at the time, said really a 5% would be more, in his opinion, doable, but you never know when you're going to have one of those situations where it could hit your portfolio.
Wow. That sounds
and that's why we have gravitated to the safe one.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, because, again, talking with advisors, about being smart and proactive planning and all that stuff for years, it's like, people would give that example of saying, okay, you got $1 million, right? You pull 4% out a year, it's 40 grand, right? Is that sustainable over, the long term, if there was downturns in the market and so on and so forth. And it's become this number that's been synonymous with everything. I'm pretty sure that everybody getting close to retirement has probably heard this, whether you're, just first kind of dipping into the financial information for yourself or not. It's pretty well known. So what's his idea now with all that? So is moving it to 4.7, you were saying?
He has. And one of the things that he did was change the way the portfolios invested. He was beginning to be concerned about inflation and the impact on portfolios. And he was a financial advisor for many, many, many years.
Okay.
And when he originally did it, he said, let's assume we've got a portfolio that's partly in stocks, partly in bonds. He settled on 50% in stocks, 50% in bonds for his final analysis, but he did test a wide range. Okay. And he said you should never be less than 50% in stocks. That was his opinion. So he used U.S. large cap stocks and intermediate treasury bonds. There's a whole lot of other asset classes outside of that people invest in, especially these days. Nobody's just putting half in large cap U.S.
Right.
and half in intermediate bonds. And so he expanded the portfolio and ran it with a 55-45 stock and bond split and said, under this new analysis, these new assumptions, you can actually take 4.7% as that this is what would never run out of money in a 30-year retirement.
Now, I would assume that means updated regular rebalancing and keeping an eye on things, which is interesting because we just had that, that bond period that was just terrible,
right?
For a number of years.
Right, exactly. And that's part of the interesting thing about his asset allocation. He's still using those 40% intermediate term government bonds, which didn't do so well most recently.
Interesting. So, just with that kind of general, I guess headline, right? Is it a green light? You kind of said that in the tease. Is it a green light to kind of get a raise in your spending in retirement? Or should we be a little bit more proactive than that and look at some things?
I think you really do have to look at your own situation. How are you invested? What might you average over time? Depending on how you're willing to be invested. This, in his particular assumption, he's saying you're going to have 55% in stocks and it's going to be equally divided among large cap, mid cap, small cap, micro cap, and international. And 80% of those are in that higher volatility area. So that mid cap, small cap, micro cap, and international. So think sequence of return risk and how is if you followed this structure that he's using, how would having more in those more volatile impact you in shorter periods of time? He's looking at numbers over very long periods of time and just looking at the end result, the average, and people live through it from year to year. And that's a little bit different. Living through it from year to year, how would you react and how would it impact you? The other thing is looking at where you've got your bonds and are you going to be comfortable with those intermediate bonds? So you've got to look at where you're invested, what those average returns would be, what risk you are willing to take, what your goals are, what you need to draw down, what is your whole plan, and then what is your own safe withdrawal rate.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So what's the takeaway then? Okay. So we're kind of, walking through that stuff. And to me, then this seems kind of theoretical, right? So you got to put it into practice really more with your advisor than just kind of in theory, which is kind of that back of the napkin 4% thing that I just did with the $1 million a second ago. So what should hopeful retirees take away from this? If you're thinking that you need to make an income adjustment, for example, what's some things to consider?
I think, can you adjust your retirement income strategy? I think if you look at your plan, you may be able to take a higher withdrawal rate than just the 4% rule of thumb. And we've talked about the fact that rules of thumb they're not an individual recommendation. It's a rule of thumb. It's an average. And so you may be able to take more than that. You have to consider, what point in time that you're starting retirement, what the first 5 years of retirement could look like, because that's the riskiest point in time. And Benjamin himself points out that when stock valuations are high, as they currently are, then that's a riskier time. And you really need to reduce your withdrawal rate a little bit in that period, or he suggests even work 6 months or a year longer just to let valuations come back down. So it's a good time to revisit the plan, look at the current situation, and determine from that, working with a professional that has some insight into, how all of these things work together. From that point, decide what is a good starting withdrawal rate.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so what's your kind of personal take on that? I mean, even just the long-standing 4% rule, like I said earlier, seems like everybody kind of is familiar with it, had heard it. Do you think it was accurate? Do you think it's right or wrong? Or is it just like a lot of rules of thumbs, it's just a kind of a starting point to maybe get a conversation rolling and then you adjust from there?
I certainly do think it's a starting point. It's something that you can use in a conversation to say, oh, well, 4% would be, like you said, $1 million, $40,000. It gives a quick and easy way to have a conversation without getting into the details, running the plan, looking at all of the different specifics for that person's individual situation.
Right. I mean, that makes sense because it's so generic, right? So somebody says that and you go, well, 4% off the $1 million, like we said, it's 40,000. But let's just, what kind of account is it, right? If it's an IRA, well, you don't have $1 million. Right. You owe the government some money. You owe some taxes. So there's different kinds of ways of looking at that. So I think it's, to your point, like any rule of thumb, right? It's like the rule of 100, for example, right? It's like, well, take your age, blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe that's like a rough idea to kind of get you in the ballpark, but then every person is different. So you got to dive in deeper.
Even Benjamin said it was a starting point. He did not use 4% with every client.
Oh, good.
He worked with clients to determine where they fit in the range of withdrawal rates based on how much equities were they willing to have, how much did they have in bonds, what was their life expectancy, what was cost of living, what were interest rates and markets and the economy, all of that we put into the plan. He said that applies as well. So he recognized that it was not just a static 4%. People took that from it because that's simplifying it.
Yeah.
We like things simple.
Yeah, sure.
But we need to really, we need to get into the details for any individual situation to make sure that it's the right fit, the right plan for that person.
I wonder if he was kind of ever taken aback or blown away about how it became like the norm. It just kind of took off, one of those things that kind of went.
I would think so.
Because it really became like the standard, like it's used everywhere all the time for the last, 30 years. So pretty wild. What factors, Liz, are more important? Like what factors matter more than the percentage you withdraw? Is there other things we want to consider? Kind of like saying, when people say, well, I need $1 million, we get fixated on that number. I think we also get fixated on the withdrawal rate, right? What's some other things that might maybe carry more weight?
I think it's important to think about your goals and what you want your retirement to look like, when you want to spend money, earlier on or later on, because the 4% rule is just like you're going to take 4% at the beginning, you're going to adjust it for inflation, and you're never going to adjust it upwards or downwards, and other than inflation. But in real life, if you can think through having some bucket plans in place, some guardrails on your spending, you can allow yourself to spend more when you're healthier and you can do more, and reduce spending later. There's some additional thought and planning that needs to go into it, but it's going to let you build a more robust retirement that really fits how you want to live life, let your money support you to do the things that you want to do, as opposed to you're just taking this fixed number because somebody did a study, and that doesn't have any real flexibility to let you achieve what you really want to achieve in retirement. So
Gotcha.
I like putting a plan together that lets you build all of that flexibility into how you live.
So people listening are saying, okay, great, interesting. At the end of the day, what's my personal safe withdrawal rate? Like, how do I determine that, right? That's what most people are going to want to know, right?
Yeah. And you have to run a plan. That's the only way to really,
right?
Yeah, you've got to run a plan. You have to think through the answers to the questions. How long are you going to live? What does your portfolio look like? How's it invested? What's your tolerance for risk? All of the different pieces that go into a plan. And then that plan can tell you, here's your amount of money. Here's your maximum lifetime withdrawals from your accounts, including tax that has to be paid. It accounts for all of those specifics. And that gives you your own answer for your situation. And there's some nuances to thinking through that beyond just the 4% range. Benjamin said, we want to know what number won't run out of money.
Right.
But that may not be your goal. You may not want to just not run out of money. You may want to have a certain amount left at the end.
True. Good point.
Yeah. And he also said, let's see what you could take if you take the highest amount of risk possible. Well, you might not want to take the highest amount of risk possible. You might want to take the smallest risk you're required to take to meet your goals. It's two different views of how you're approaching what you're taking out of your account.
Yeah.
And he also said you have to plan for 30 years. That was just an idea of, okay, 65 to 95. Well, you might retire younger. You might retire later. You might have more longevity in your family. There might be a reason to run a different number of years, longer or shorter, to think through your safe withdrawal rate. So there's a lot of things that go into making it very individualized and personalized so that you can have the best safe withdrawal rate for your own situation.
Yeah, it hit me when you were talking. I didn't mean to jump in on you there, but when you said that, the risk, right? Somebody it might say, take more risk, and somebody is not comfortable with that. But everybody's situation is different. If you're lucky enough that you run the numbers, your Social Security between you and your spouse, maybe you both have a pension, and and your goals are to leave a bigger legacy. Well, then maybe you could take a bigger risk, right? Than someone who's not in that situation, because you do have more guaranteed income streams, right? So every situation does wind up up breaking down differently depending on A, what the goals are that you want to accomplish, and B, what are the tools you already have in place to do it. So it's totally universal. I mean, it's universal stuff, but it's individualized.
Exactly. You have to you have to dig into the specifics for your own situation to get the very best plan for yourself.
Yeah. So rule of
So
thumb.
that you can be on your best path.
That's right. So you can be on your best path. Rules of thumb are just that, right? They're rules of thumb. We do them in all sorts of walks of life. So they're great little tools to kind of get the conversation started, as Liz said earlier. But the real value lies in building that plan that adapts, not just to trends, but, to your life, your goals, and what's kind of going on, and taking in all these things into account. So to get on your best path, what do? Well, you reach out to Liz, of course, and have a conversation with her specifically about your situation. You can get some time on her calendar just by going to bestpathadvisors.com. That's bestpathadvisors.com. And while you're there, check out all the other tools and resources that she has available. Schedule some time on the calendar, of course, but also check out her YouTube page and, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube page. A lot of good content she puts out, a lot of YouTube videos that has some helpful things and breaking stuff down. So good stuff there as well. Again, that's bestpathadvisors.com, and you can subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or, of course, YouTube. Thanks, Liz, for breaking this down and kind of explaining this a little bit. Again, I'm really curious. I'd love to hear what this guy's thoughts were on just how, I guess, viral, if you will, to use a modern term, that the 4% rule became over these last 30 years.
It was a good conversation, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time here on Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whitteberry.
The preceding program is sponsored by Best Path Advisors, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through J.W. Cole Advisors. Best Path Advisors, J.W. Cole Financial, and J.W. Cole Advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Liz Whitteberry should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Neither J.W. Cole Financial nor its representatives provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. Persons who provide such advice do so in a capacity other than as a registered representative of J.W. Cole. Investing is subject to risks, including the loss of principal. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable, however, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed.